God bless your souls.
Mr. Kamanga, please sit. No theatrics today.
Let them fair, they'll be crying for me when Tempeletu burns down.
Just keep it together.
Fine, I'll keep it together.
Thank you.
All rise.
You may be seated. Are the prosecution and defense ready with arguments?
Yes, Your Worship.
The court accepts that a further 35 charges has been added to Mr. Kamanga's charges based on evidence entered into discovery. Now, before we proceed, I would like to address the people at the gallery. This courtroom is not a soccer stadium. I will not tolerate any disruptions. As such, there will be no clapping, no yelling, and no noise during proceedings. Anyone who disrupts my courtroom will be removed and will not be allowed back. So please, restrain yourselves. I hope I've made myself clear. Mr. Lata, you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Worship. The prosecution calls Mr. Nkosinathi Zondo. Mr. Zondo, how do you know ex-police officer Adrian Labuskaghni?
I was a junior officer in the same precinct years ago, before I was transferred into correctional services.
Mr. Zondo, how was your relationship with Mr. Labuskaghni when you were transferred to correctional services?
We maintain a good relationship, yes. And I was the one who facilitated the stabbing and murder of other inmates.
According to your affidavit, Mr. Labuskaghni asked you to keep a close eye on Mr. Boikanyo Mphahlele when he was arrested. Please, tell the court in more detail what happened.
I allowed Mr. Patiaki to get closer to Boikanyo, and I also facilitated that he should be moved to a closer cell. The boy was very scared and traumatized.
Your Worship, I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit A. Mr. Zondo, do you recognize that letter?
Yes, it is the same confession that Mr. Labuskaghni forced Mr. Mphahlele to sign.
Objection. Leading the witness.
Overruled. Order!
So, he made it clear it was Mr. Kamanga who wanted Boikanyo dead.
Yes, Mr. Kamanga. Mr. Kamanga wanted to frame the boy that he's the one who killed.
Please, continue.
He wanted to frame the boy, as I was saying, that he's the one who killed Mrs. Pagatwa.
Mr. Zondo, you stated that Mr. Labuskaghni instructed you to spy, beat, and facilitate the murder of other inmates. Who did he say made these requests?
Castro Kamanga.
Order in court. Order!
You testified earlier that Mr. Labuskaghni instructed you to facilitate the killing of Mr. Boikanyo Mphahlele under Mr. Kamanga's orders. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Was my client present when Mr. Labuskaghni instructed you to facilitate the killing of Mr. Mphahlele?
No.
Have you ever had any direct contact with my client before, whether be it a call, text messages, or email?
No.
If Mr. Labuskaghni told you that the president of USA wanted you to facilitate the killing of someone, would you have believed him?
Objection, Your Honor.
Miss Charlie, get to the point.
Mr. Zondo, you testified that you never spoke to Mr. Kamanga. So how can you be sure that Mr. Labuskaghni wasn't lying, that it was Mr. Kamanga who ordered the hit on Mr. Mphahlele?
Ma'am, if someone asks you to do the job for the premier, you do not ask questions. You shut up and just do the job.
Has Mr. Labuskaghni asked you to do work for other people?
Yes, he did. He had lots of connection.
How could you distinguish that the jobs were for Mr. Kamanga or for someone else?
Mr. Andriani used code for different people. So he referred to the premier as Cobra.
So Mr. Labuskaghni never referred to my client by his name?
No, I think he purposely did that to protect the premier and ourselves.
Could it be possible that maybe the jobs that Mr. Labuskaghni claimed were for my client, Mr. Kamanga, were actually for somebody else?
Possibly, yes.
Your Worship, Mr. Zondo admitted that there was no direct correspondence with Mr. Kamanga. Moreover, beyond a cryptic code that does not verify with clarity that these instructions came from Mr. Kamanga. Mr. Zondo admitted to commit serious crimes, also admitting that he committed these serious crimes for financial gain. So how can we be assured that he is not paid to do exactly the same thing here? Or that Mr. Labuskaghni was not name-dropping to apply pressure onto these illicit activities so that these officials and inmates could have pressure and commit these crimes he wanted them to commit?
Miss Charlie, please keep the speeches for the closing arguments.
Yes.
Answer the question, Mr. Zondo.
Your Worship.
I've done unsavory. But what I'm saying now is the truth.
If I told you that I work for Rutigolosh, would you believe me?
Counsel.
I'm just illustrating the point that without tacit proof, this is nothing more than hearsay evidence.
Captain Reddy, how long have you served in the SAPS?
25 years.
And how long were you station commander?
10.
How would you describe your relationship with Mr. Kamanga?
Well, I had a very good relationship with Mr. Kamanga since he was the MEC of Transport. We worked very closely together.
And how was this close working relationship with Mr. Kamanga?
Well, it started off very official. I was then approached by Senior Detective Labuskaghni about a case involving taxi violence, which involved Mr. Kamanga's fleet.
Go on, Captain.
Well, we then arrested 2 drivers and a hitman who were involved in violent skirmishes surrounding route disputes. It was an open and shut case, really. Then I was approached by Detective Labuskaghni to help with certain dockets.
Help.
He offered me 10,000 per docket. I just need to say to the court that I just had a child and I was in immense financial pressure, so I took the deal.
Was Mr. Labuskaghni specific about where the instruction to lose the dockets came from?
He said he was approached by Mr. Kamanga's brother, who we know works with and for Mr. Kamanga.
Were there any other instances where Mr. Kamanga instructed you to act in an illegal or illicit manner?
Well, Detective Labuskaghni started getting closer and closer with Mr. Kamanga and his brother. He started talking about direct engagements.
Direct engagements? About what?
Making dockets disappear.
Silence!
Concealing evidence, doctoring crime scenes, things like that.
All this for payment?
Yes. We also provided backup and cover for certain violent acts. We also returned all confiscated and impounded goods that were attached to Mr. Kamanga's network. We sold illegal arms for him, and we returned all confiscated drugs back to him.
Him being, please, be specific.
Castro Kamanga.
Silence!
How long have you worked for Mr. Kamanga, Mr. Labuskaghni?
Mr. Kamanga first approached me about 6.5 years ago. He was then the then MEC of Transport.
Approached you to do what, exactly?
At first it started with the lower level things, but very quickly escalated to that of bribery, and then some intimidation. Then the falsifying of police evidence, which included that of creating forged documentation. Eventually it ended up in the ordering of hits and the cleaning and clearing out of those bodies. Anything and everything, really. Whatever was necessary.
Whatever was necessary.
Yes.
The defense would have us believe that, Mr. Labuskaghni, you were working as a rogue agent acting on your own, or inferring your connection to Mr. Kamanga. How then can we be certain that you were, in fact, working under the instruction of Mr. Kamanga?
Mr. Kamanga was a very smart and a very clever man in the beginning, so everything we did was in cash. But then an account was created. And flowing between that account via 3 other accounts, money flowed freely. But the account of origin was that of a shelf company in the name of a business of which Mr. Kamanga was definitely a director.
Well, that does not necessarily prove that Mr. Kamanga was ordering hits on his opponents.
If he was ordering me to order flowers and deliver flowers, then he wouldn't have gone to that trouble. So what I'm saying is, actual payments directly correlate to certain jobs. As I said, it forms part of the evidence that I've submitted to the court. So the dates of certain payments has a direct link to certain crimes. And that I did state in my affidavit.
Is there a direct incident which will illustrate your accusation?
Yes, there is. That of the death of Magoniwe Pakatwayo and the subsequent hit on Boikanyo Mpahlele. Those are such incidents.
Please, elaborate, Mr. Labuskaghni.
Mr. Kamanga approached me directly and asked me to smooth over his involvement in the murder of Magoniwe.
And what exactly do you mean by smooth over?
Mr. Kamanga told me directly that he was in a heated argument with Magoniwe, and in the heat of the moment, he then strangled her. At that moment, Boikanyo entered his premises and saw the body.
And what was Mr. Mpahlele doing there?
Boikanyo came there to return money that Mr. Kamanga had paid him to incite or start an uprising within the community. But because Boikanyo had seen the body of Magoniwe, they couldn't let him leave. So they forced him to interact with the body to ensure that his DNA would be found on her body.
No, you lied. He's lied.
Mr.
She was like a
Kamanga,
mother to me. I
enough.
loved her. I would never.
Counsel, control your client, please. Now, I understand the emotional nature of today's testimony, but I urge all parties involved, especially the accused, to maintain decorum in my courtroom or risk being charged with contempt. You may continue, Mr. Latta.
If it pleases the court, Mr. Labuskaghni can continue with his testimony.
So after they orchestrated for Boikanyo's DNA to be found on Magoniwe's body, we then shot the body twice. We then paid for the forensic report to state, for the coroner's report to state that those 2 shots were the cause of death, which then enabled us to arrest Boikanyo. At first, Boikanyo was not prepared to sign the prepared admission of guilt that we had prepared for him, the confession. But then I found out where his grandmother stayed, took a video of it and showed it to him. And at that moment, understandably, he signed the prepared confession. We then paid Mr. Pariachi to hang Boikanyo in his cell to make it look like a suicide.
Thank you, Mr. Labuskaghni. Your witness.
Beyond the account trail that is yet to be forensically tested, is there any other forensic evidence that links Mr. Kamanga to the night in question, Mr. Labuskaghni?
Yes, there is. There are samples of DNA, which belongs to Mr. Kamanga, that came directly from Magwaniwe's neck. I took those samples myself before burning the body.
Mr. Kamanga and Miss Goniwe were close.
Yes, they were.
So, could it be possible, Mr. Labuskaghni, that the DNA was exchanged from a hug or maybe other form of physical contact, yes?
Nice try, but no. The samples of the DNA that belongs to Mr. Kamanga, they came directly from Magoniwe's neck where the bruises occurred, and which is indicative of the actual cause of death, which is that of death by strangulation. I also then asked, I instructed the coroner to keep that original report. And as you know, the coroner is also on the witness list.
And I thought I was the one conducting this cross-examination?
No, I'm just trying to be thorough. And with the court's permission, I would really like to continue.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Mr. Kamanga also handled Boikanyo's jacket. Therefore, not only does it contain his DNA, but the DNA of Mrs. Bakatwayo and Boikanyo himself. That coupled with the statements from Mr. Zondu and my submissions of the fact that I was not only present in Mr. Kamanga's house at the time that the body was removed, but I also orchestrated the removal of that body. And then also the fact that I coerced Boikanyo to admit to certain things. All of that builds up to the body of evidence in this matter.
Miss Charlie, are you done? Or do you have any more questions for this witness?
I do have some further questions, Your Worship.
Very well.
Mr. Labuskaghni,
Yes.
you and Detective Mohammed had a romantic relationship. Is that not so?
Yes, that is correct. About 2.5 years ago.
And in that time, you were suspended from active duty, transferred to another police station due to a domestic abuse charge lodged by Detective Mohammed. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The same Detective Mohammed who you worked closely with in this very case.
Correct.
Over and above that fact, you submitted that Mr. Kamanga was not the only high-level political and business figure you conducted work for. Is that correct?
If you say so, yes.
So, what's to say that you're not doing the same thing here?
No.
That you coerced your former partner, Detective Mohammed, who suffered years of abuse, to help you.
No.
And that, no, you were still manipulating the evidence brought before this court for your own ends.
Objection.
Withdrawn. No further questions, Your Worship.
Mr. Lata, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Worship. The prosecution calls Mr. Langelihle Kamanga to the stand.
Order! Order!
Now that's my brother. How is this possible?
There was an emergency pre-trial conference that was held with the magistrate in chambers, and it was allowed.
No, you gotta stop this. You gotta stop
I'm
this.
sorry, Mr. Kamanga, my hands are tied.
No.
There's nothing I can do about it.
No, make this.
I cannot.
You gotta stop this, make this go away, please.
Please state your full name for the court.
Langelihle Kamanga.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? If so, raise your right hand and say, I do, so help me God.
I do, so help me God.
Thank you, Mr. Lata. You may continue.
Thank you, Worship. Mr. Kamanga, what is your relationship with the defendant?
He's my brother.
How much proximity did you have to your brother?
Besihlala ndawonye imsebenzela. Benguchef wakhe nyakonke la hamba khona. Phecelezi bengiyisekela lakhe.
So you were his right-hand man?
Ngasho ukuthi phecelezi umsila wakhe.
So you know your brother better than other people?
Yebo kunjalo.
So tell us, what other work were you doing for Mr. Kamanga, aside from cooking and being his confidant?
I was his fixer.
Please, elaborate for the court what exactly you mean by that.
Bengihlela ama-bribes. Ngenze ama-docket anama-criminal evidence ukuthi anyamalale.
Order. If I have to say that again, I will clear this court.
Ngenza ama-deal nama-judge nakanye namaphoyisa uma kunamacala abhekene nomfowethu. Ngiphinde futhi ngihire inkabi ukuthi izoyenza umsebenzi wokubulala.
It looks like working for Mr. Kamanga was quite a handful. Were these jobs sanctioned by Mr. Kamanga?
Yebo. Kwesinye isikhathi ubethuba mina mathupha ukuthi ngiyenze eminye yale misebenzi uma ibucayi.
Bendicela ucacisele inkundla ukuthi uthetha ukuthini xa usithi imisebenzi ebucayi.
Maningi kakhulu angeke ngakwazi ukuthi ngiwasho wonke kodwa ukubulala, kidnapper kanye nokwenza amacala abhekene nomfowethu ukuthi ashabalala.
Order. You may continue, Mr. Lata.
Thank you, Worship. Did Mr. Kamanga commit any crimes by himself?
Yebo. Ngaphambi kokuthi abe MEC. Ubengacabanga kabili ukuthi abulale omunye wezimbangi zakhe. Noma ashaya abantu esibakidnaphile ukuthi bakhiphe information. Wakuyeka konke lokho uma sekaqala umkhakha lokuba yipolitician. Wathi kuzomdonsela amanzi ngomsene.
Lilonke uzama ukuthi yonke imisebenzi yakhe engcolileyo wayiphosela kuwo.
Yebo kunjalo.
In your written statement, you claim your brother was directly responsible for the murder of Mrs. Goniwe Phakathwayo. Can you elaborate?
Yebo wamqhinya uMphakathwayo.
Tell us, what happened after he strangled Mrs. Phakathwayo?
Ngeke ngaklina i-crime scene. Ngayenza ngathi ubuyikanyo umbulele.
Tata Castro bona man, ka kopa no loko le ke tsamaye. Bona ke tara ka bona silo, nna ka utla silo. Bona ke stana na fela se useless. Leng ka ke bolela batho ka tsentse.
So plan lo bo. Are, thusa batho ba.
Mang.
Emva kwalokho ke ulabo Skakhni wamisa ejele, wayenza isiqiniseko sokuthi umfana confess ukuthi yena umbulele.
How did it come to be that you were arrested for conspiracy to commit murder, aiding and abetting, fraud, racketeering, and blackmail?
Umfowethu uCastro bekathuke kakhulu umethola ukuthi umunye weimbangi zakhe zakudala ezamatekisi umabuza kuzomela athule ubufakazi kuyo lenkundla. lapho-ke wabona ukuthi yinye 4 indlela ukuthi angamstopa ngayo ukuthi ayenze ideal naye. Sahlela umhlangano, azange avele uMabuza wathumela umfowakhe uSenzo. UCastro azange aphathe kahle neze. Ubone ngathi uyadeleleka. uSenzo wafaka utswayi kakhulu esilondeni uma sekemdelela uCastro ekhuluma amagama angekho mnandi kuye. Lapho-ke wakhipha isibhamu wafaka inhlamvu esibhamu. Wabona ukuthi lento izomdonsela amanzi ngomsele. Wabona ukuthi kungcono aze nechinga lokuthi athathe isidumbu asifake emotweni kalwandle.
Ingaba sikhona isathu esebange ba akhethe ulwandle?
Bekafuna ukuhlala entanyeni yakakhulekani nolwandle. Ekakhulukazi ulwandle afuna uhoxe kule ndaba yakhe yokukhankasela ukuba yimeya.
Oh, utsho umyeni wakhe.
uCastro uyathola ukuthi umyeni wakhe uyena ufanda le case. uCastro azange umphathe kahle lokho. Wafuna ukuthi akayiyeke leyo nto. Azange avume ukukhulekani. uCastro ongicela ukuthi ngifake isidumbu emotweni kalwandle. Yimina engathipha amaphoyisa. Yimina engathatha izithombe ngazifaka ku social media.
We have heard shocking and hard-hitting testimony